There we go. Okay, so I guess Ian, Jeff and I have an update. We Jeff's been, besides being involved with OWASP for the last 2 decades, he's been involved with the PCI folks for the last 10, I think.
Yeah, something like that. I actually have no idea. Something like that.
And he made an introduction to a gentleman who seems to be heading up the program management for all of the PCI standards themselves. And there's multiple standards. And so anyway, Jeff set up a conversation with them, and it was really good. So Jeff, do you want to provide just a quick overview of kind of where we're at with that?
Yeah, what was interesting was I had sort of pitched to him at a high level what Attestations Project was all about, and he was interested. But when we got on the call, he was like, this actually really hits a pain point for us, because we have all these, they call them assessors, PCI assessors out there, like Coalfire and all these companies that are generating these reports against these standards, and they're all paper, like the whole thing, paper everywhere. And it's very expensive. They can't manage them. They can't update them. Like it's really complicated. So, he's interested because he sees this as a potential way of cutting through some of that. And he also said that he's very interested in how other standards line up with PCI standards. So, if there's a requirement in ASVS and it matches up with one in, the PCI standards, like, why not share? And they have both technical standards and process standards, by the way. So they've got like BSIM kind of things and ASVS kind of things. And so we just asked if we could have permission to like create a version of the PCI standards, using our format, and then go through an exercise of trying them. And he's all on board. Didn't see any intellectual property problems. So I thought it was a really great meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was really interested, or seemed to be interested, again, talking to those pain points with the assessors. He was really interested in kind of what our next steps as a group is, which is seeing if what we actually built, how we think it's going to work, actually does work when we're trying to use our own standard to actually perform the assessments against those standards, right? So that's kind of the next thing that we're going to be doing. And he seemed to be really interested in that as well. So I thought it was a great meeting.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Congratulations.
Their standards have more guidance in them than I think we're used to. And I sent a snippet of one of their requirements out there, but we may want to look at, we may have to make sure that we have a spot for everything in their standards, because they've got both the requirement and then guidance for assessors and like implementation advice, all in the standard.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I don't necessarily know if I would implement it the exact same way that PCI does, but even SSDF has that examples thing. It's just additional text to complement the requirement, but it's not necessarily part of that requirement. So, I mean, even they have some stuff that I would like to be able to capture.
Yeah. Because it is really helpful. It helps you really understand the requirement.
Right.
Yeah. So we talked about adding like a supplemental field. Do we need to be more specific in there, kind of like with different types of supplemental, or is it sufficient to have like a supplemental text block or an array of supplemental text blocks? Do we need to be more granular than that on like type?
Well, why don't we go through the exercise of like trying to handle the PCI standards and see what falls out. That's probably the most efficient way. And if we need to update the standard, we can just do that. I'm guessing it's mostly just text fields.
Yeah. You sent me the link. It's on my other computer.
My other computer. What? This is 2023.
Yeah, well, VPN, no VPN.
Oh my
If
God.
I'm in the same boat, I got one on one side and one on the other. I do the same thing.
Are you
Yeah.
kidding me? Oh my God, I
Yeah.
could never handle that.
I
Yeah.
mean, I have internal Slack that can't talk to external Slack. So if I want to talk on like
Really?
open source, I have one computer. And then if I want to do like work stuff, I have another like work computer.
Do you have another
Right.
personal, like another machine for all your personal stuff, like your finances and whatnot?
No, I just use like my own like personal own machine for basically anything I do open source.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so the link that Jeff sent was, let's see if this copies over. Yeah, okay. Share screen. So this is the link that Jeff sent to me in email last week.
Yep.
I just put the link in the Zoom chat. And let's see.
So what you want to do is scroll down here and go for the, if you pull down that little thing that says PCI DSS, no, up higher, the blue one, that one, and put in, scroll down a little bit. I thought there was something about SSF in here. Software security, that's the one.
Okay.
Then these are the standards we're interested in, the secure software standard and the secure SLC standard. So the
Secure
top one and
software
the third
standard.
one-
This.
Yeah, the first one and the third one are the ones that we care about here, and you can just get the latest version.
Right. This is probably PDF too, isn't it? Yeah, of course. I'll have
Yeah.
to reshare. Oh no, it's gonna open the
Well,
browser. Okay.
remember, he said he was going to try and send a
Really? Okay.
ASDF.
Yeah. Seriously. Seriously, I gotta fill this out to just
Yes.
interesting. Okay. Um let's see if that's enough. Country. Where's country? Country. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay. All right.
There you go.
So
It's, I don't know why they do all their documents landscape. It's really weird.
right.
But they
Okay,
do.
so here we are.
Yep, exactly. So they've got a control objective, and then under each, actually, they've got a section called software security governance. And then under that, there's control objective 1, which has a description. And then there's the main requirement 1.1. There's test requirements that this is what the assessor has to do to verify that they met this requirement. And then there's guidance.
I actually like that, quite honestly.
Yeah, no, it's good. They've been doing this a long time. Like, I don't know when the PCI first came out, but it was like, early 2000s, maybe 2000. I think it was pre-aspect.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah. That's when they put in a requirement that said you can either do a code review, like a manual code review, or use a WAF. And everyone was like, fuck that, I'm using a WAF.
Right. It's the easy button.
And I was like, I was arguing with him. I was like, that's not the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. So it looks to me like we could add a few more fields to the standard. Now, SSDF has the requirements and then it has examples. And the examples could actually fall into the same kind of thing as guidance, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
basically the same thing.
Yeah. I'm good with that. It's the test requirements one that's a little different.
Right.
And I've seen that before. The CMMs all have that. Uh, the SEI software security CMMs and so on. They've got like guidance and then they've got an assessment standard against that standard.
Right. Let's see, because right now 1.6 attestations. We go down to the schema 1.5 JSON or 1.6 JSON. And then okay, requirements. For every requirement, basically, for every requirement, which is a control objective here, for every requirement, we would basically need an array of test requirements. Is that correct? Or
I'm just wondering if we should make
Well,
it like, I don't want to be, well, it's really up to the standard maker, I guess, how prescriptive they want to be. Like, I hate prescribing how something has to be tested. Because if I come up with a better way of testing it, that's, I don't know, that's what I want to use.
right.
So, but that's really their choice. And we shouldn't be telling them if they want to put how it has to be tested here, then, go ahead. But I'm just curious, like, we might want to say like, it's either a test requirement or a test suggestion or a test example. Like that's what I'm wrestling with.
so if it's 1.1 is the requirement, is the control objective, right?
Yep.
We've got one, then we've got 1.1 whose parent is 1. Why wouldn't we do 1.1 test requirement as the ref and have its parent be 1.1? And then you can render it out that way. You can put that information in there. Would just be another requirement, right? As a sub. We don't have any limitation on depth of nesting.
We don't, but
Do you
it'll
really
look
think-
like, yeah,
Uh-huh.
it'll look like it's part of the requirement in which it's not. That's the issue.
Well, I guess that's actually the question. It is sort of part of the requirement, right? Like, it's the person who does it is different, right? Like, it's not a requirement on the builder, it's a requirement on the assessor.
Right.
Right. And if I'm
At the end of
linking
the day,
in,
it's all really assigned, it's all really a requirement.
yeah. And if I'm if I'm using this that we've put out there, right, I'm going to have my evidence be evidence to those specific test requirements. So to me, it makes sense to have it as a separate nested item down below because there might be multiples of those, right?
Right, but we also have a couple different things, right? We've got requirements and we've also have guidance, both of which are also part of the same requirement. So we have one requirement, and then that requirement has basically other fields, because just like it has a name and everything else, it has basically other fields for the test requirements and for the guidance.
I feel like what they've done is they've articulated part of the argument for the user. Like, these are really, if you view this a different way, this says like, in order to meet this requirement, we have to ensure that software security responsibilities are clearly defined and assigned, and the assignment of responsibilities, blah blah, covers the whole life cycle, right? And like, it's
This one here, though, shows it perfectly. It's 1.2, right, as the control objective, but then you have test requirements 1.2a, 1.2b,
Yep.
right? So it's, again, there is just a parent-child relationship there. And if I am an assessor coming in, I am going to look at my requirement, which is 1.2a. The assessor shall examine these things, and I'm going to be supplying evidence to that specific thing. I do agree that maybe we need an additional field for, generic additional things in the requirement for things like guidance, right? Like we have the generic description
Supplemental
field.
stuff.
Yeah, maybe we could have like a supplemental type field,
Yeah.
which could be an array and, just arrays of texts or something like that. Or I'm not sure the best way to do that, but I do think maybe we need to have that one extra field in there. But the control objective versus test requirement here, I think, fits in our existing model fairly cleanly.
For this
makes
one, it
sense.
does. This one is clearly a parent-child relationship. This one is not. It's actually at the same level, which is interesting.
This really should be 1.1a,
Yeah.
right? I would just,
Everything else is.
Yeah.
Well, this one's not.
it's where they only have one, they didn't put in A and B, but I
Mhm.
think we can fairly assume that.
Yeah, so you could either collapse it up into one, or you could just assume the A, and there's
Oh.
only an A.
Do we want a for the things that are at the same level, right? So if we've got like 1.1 requirement and 1.1 test requirement, do we want to represent those both at the same level, and then maybe have an enum saying what kind of requirement it is?
Isn't that getting too specific for this particular standard, right? We found that this works really well for the other standards.
Right.
I know that PCI is important, but I don't think we should go changing the entire standard just to support them, when, just using the bomb ref format might be better, and saying, hey, in this type of a scenario, 1.1, right, and then maybe TR is the way that you collapse it up, and that's then the test requirement for that 1.1. Right? I don't think we need to change the standard for that particular thing.
I also want to circle back on what Derek said a second ago, which is like collapsing them and combining them as a single requirement.
Yeah, that's
I think that
another
also makes a lot of
possibility.
sense.
So 1.1 could be overall responsibility for the security of the software vendors, yada, yada. Then also, next paragraph, the assessor shall examine vendor evidence and interview. So you could collapse it that way as well.
I see.
Yeah.
Right.
I really don't like that. Because it's really requirements on different people will provide the evidence. Probably different people want to sign it, like eventually.
Well, the control object, that's why the original suggestion that I made was just having it be a parent-child relationship.
Yeah,
Because
I'm still on
it's,
board with that.
yeah, the control objective is more of a generic statement. I don't think you're going to take action on that, right? That's the objective.
Right.
You're getting to the objective by the test requirement itself.
Okay. So we're saying that the control objectives and test requirements are all going to be parent-child relationships. That's where we land. Is that the consensus that I'm hearing?
That test requirements are a child of control objective.
Yeah.
And then in this example, how would you do like the identifier? Would you do kind of like Derek, what you were saying, where you add like TR to the identifier or CO to the identifier to distinguish them?
Or do we just imply the A?
Oh, I mean, I would apply the A, but it probably also makes sense to designate this as a test requirement, like, so people know that this isn't it's not a requirement for the system, it's a requirement for who's ever testing the system. So I don't know if there's a way to make it's a sort of a different.
So
style.
everything has an optional title.
Hmm.
So we could use the title to make it clear that, this is a test requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of going back to the field above identifier, right? The
Yeah, no, you're
description on
talking about that.
today kind of says that should be unique in the standard. And I don't
Right.
know how would in the PCI standard for this one specifically, would you identify a test requirement?
You know, I would put maybe just a hyphen TR or something, because keep in mind, these are
Yeah.
bomb refs. These are not necessarily designed to be human readable. This is just for machine to machine linking. So, I mean, theoretically, we could just give it a UID and call it a day, but
I
I
Well,
would,
if
disagree
you
with that.
scroll down
I don't think
though,
they are bomb refs. I don't view them, and maybe I'm using the strict definition of bomb ref. I'm not thinking of it as a bomb ref. I'm
oh,
thinking of it
that's
as an
right. This is the
identifier.
identifier. This is right. This is right. This is right. Yeah, you're right.
That's why I don't want to change the identifier, because this standard has identifiers already, like 1.1a and stuff like that.
Well, in this particular case, you're going to have two 1.1s.
Okay.
I know that's really dumb. That's why I think like we should just infer the A for them and like, disambiguate it that way, but
Mhm.
as long as we're consistent with it, I think that's the most
Yeah.
important thing. So if we ever have a singular like that, a singleton like that, then we just do the A because we imply the A.
Right.
But one possibility is a different option than trying to make it a child of each requirement is you could have a separate section of that's called like test requirements or something. Because really like every standard really ought to provide this, right? Like, the requirement is for least privilege. Okay, well, how do you test that? It would really be good for us to encourage security standards to have that filled out and think through that process, because it's kind of a big gap in a lot of standards. So you could imagine a whole separate section where these are the requirements. You could have a whole similar block that's like test requirements that have, some sort of reference back to their main requirement.
At the same time, though, I was thinking of this much more generically. It's just another series of requirements. It doesn't really matter if it's a test requirement or not, right? These are things that we're going to be mapping our evidence to, or our assertions to.
You're right. I mean, technically, there's no difference. It's just, it's like a different person doing them. And so like having them in a slightly different section of the SBOM would allow the producer to create this, here's how I met these requirements. And then the separate section, the auditor is providing all the evidence for these test requirements and saying, here's how I met those, rather than having it be all mixed up.
How about this? Here's another suggestion. Other than the supplemental thing, which we'll add a field for, why don't we do this? And I think this will handle both concerns. If we add two external references, one for requirements, one for test requirements, they could quite literally link to each other. You keep them separate, and they can, yeah, the requirements document for every single requirement, every single requirement can have an external reference. Then you can reference the exact test requirement. It could be in the same BOM, it could be in a different BOM, it doesn't really matter.
So it's an array of test requirements, right?
It could be, yeah.
Because I would think for one requirement, you want multiple test requirements.
And then the test requirements could then link back via external references, could then link back to the requirements.
Then
That would be one way to do it.
Then the auditor could work in a completely separate document, right? And like generate their evidence.
Yes. Yes.
Sign it and all that. Yeah. That's got some advantages.
Isn't that exactly the same workflow that we were talking about just by, again, submitting evidence? I worry that that's adding an additional complication, because we already support auditors working on a particular requirement, whatever that is, because of the other pieces of the schema that we have. So an individual could submit a piece of evidence for that, regardless of who that individual is. We kept it much looser on purpose to allow for those types of things. And now we're saying that, okay, for things like this, there's going to be a requirement to rely on external references, because now this is where some of our testing is going to be linking in via that. So I don't know if I'm describing this clearly enough. I did not get a lot of sleep last night, but like I'm concerned that we're putting logic in here where we maybe shouldn't have logic.
Okay, that's fair.
Basically, PCI's come out here and said, you know, like, look, this is the overall control objective, and then these are the very specific requirements for that control objective. They just happen to be called testing requirements, but they're still really just requirements. And if it's a different person who's going to be, you know, submitting evidence on that, right, it's still going to be an individual who the auditor's talking to who's submitting evidence, then the auditor's still going to be validating that evidence, right? So it still falls into the pattern that we've been using up until now.
Which is the whole parent-child relationship, and just put an A here.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to be the easy button.
So maybe we're thinking about this part of it. I don't want to say the wrong way, but maybe there's a different way to think about it, where we want to allow for some kind of metadata on the requirements that allows you to put in certain things like guidance, or say, hey, this is a test requirement. So if there are different standards that have different nuances like this, that we can empower them via that metadata to say, like, oh, by the way, this is a control objective, this is a test requirement, this is guidance. I'm not sure what we'd call that, but maybe that's the approach here. So not overload the external reference, but instead have a metadata.
Properties. Okay. So we have properties, and then we have, so this will have to support properties, which it does not. What's that?
Do we have a type? We have a description, but that's of the requirement. Do we have a type?
No, we don't. But if we made this a property, we can extend it without actually having to change the spec. That's kind of how properties work. So, so like, I mean, GitLab's got properties, and IBM's got registered properties, and I think Lockheed Martin, I think you guys have some.
Like the way that the containers do it, right? Where you have different labels and you can namespace the labels. So we could do for PCI, com.pci dot,
test
whatever we want to call it. Yeah, test requirement.
Yeah, we could do that.
And that's exactly what I did for the DMTF auditing standard as well.
Did you?
It's the tagging mechanism, yeah. So if that spec I referenced to you a while ago with taxonomy, that's got a mechanism for tagging for PCI for different auditing domains, same way.
Yeah, maybe that's the way we do it. Because every spec is going to have a little bit of nuance.
That's true. I feel like this concept of a test requirement, though, is pretty fundamental. Like, I don't think people will use it if it's just a property and it's like, they don't know what to put in that property, they won't use it. I think this is
all about putting a specific tag, effectively a key value pair, on a requirement to denote it as a test requirement for the specific spec.
But at the same time, what did we do for some of the other ones, for some of the other things that we've had out there, right? Some of the other requirement standards, sorry, nouns, some of the other standards that we're using right now, or that we've already codified, right? Are there specific requirements, specific things that we would qualify as testing requirements in those already? And did we just do the parent-child relationship? That's kind of my push here is like, no, okay.
I mean,
goes back to everything is domain specific. So we're not creating our new domain or new framework for evaluation ourselves. So the best you can do is to allow this tagging with a proper domain, scheme namespacing, like we have a registration thing for properties. We shouldn't be crossing over in that domain and creating a standard for ourselves, independent of different long-standing security frameworks. So
we're just talking about I feel like that's a lot of degrees of freedom, and that people will mess it up. Like, I don't think there are other types of requirements. I mean, there's these ones that apply directly to the thing, and then there's requirements for the auditor to check. But I don't know if there's like
The auditor for what domain? The auditor for what domain though? That's the
We're
question.
talking about PCI here.
That's what I'm saying. It's domain specific. So,
Yeah,
So
but I'm saying in every case, there's some kind of control objective, some kind of main requirement, and then there's a set of requirements for testing that main requirement was met.
right, but so how is this particular instance here different than, for example, BSIM SM31, right? I'm looking at one of the standards we've already committed, right? Where it's use a software asset tracking application with portfolio right? Like, to me, accountability for ensuring security of software vendors, products, and services is formally assigned to an individual or a team. It's the exact same kind of thing. It's just a requirement, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had the
It's-
same
it's-
thing for SSDF, right? There
Yeah.
was practices, which is very similar to control objective, and then there was tasks, which would be similar to the requirement.
And then in the rest of our standard, we're literally saying, like, here's the evidence that we have assigned this thing, right? So it's the PCI standard says that this is a testing requirement, but the reality is it's just another piece of requirement that we have to show that we're meeting by supplying evidence.
Well, the part you missed about this 1.1a is that it says the assessor shall examine vendor evidence. But it is weird, the part about accountability for ensuring the security of vendors' products, and like that piece is actually a requirement it's like a main requirement, right?
Right.
Because it's telling them it's telling the assessor to confirm these three things. Which
But
then
doesn't the assessor make the assertion for these test requirements no matter what? Like, if we go down, say 3-4 pages, isn't the assessor always the person who's going to be doing these testing requirements? Because I thought the purpose of the PCI spec was that the assessors are going to be validating and making these assertions. And they're working with people within the organization to gather the evidence, but they're the ones who are saying, yes, this evidence meets this test requirement, and they're signing off on it.
yes, that's all true.
Yeah, so again, I think that our existing standard, our existing standard here that we've developed can check all of those boxes by just treating this as a sub requirement. I'd even go further to say, hey, I've got 1A, 1, 2, and 3. So if this was me internally building something out, right, and I wasn't concerned with how PCI strictly views it, but I was trying to implement this in my company, I would break this test requirement out into 3 different subsections on purpose, because to me, these are 3 different things that I care about. And I'm not saying that we as OWASP take that liberal of an approach here, but like personally, if I was implementing it, these are 3 very unique things, not very unique, but these are 3 unique / related things. I'd want to supply evidence for each of them independently and have that traceability throughout if I was doing this myself.
I don't see why we wouldn't do that. Like, that's going to make it much easier to use this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the 1.1a - 1, 2, and 3 makes a ton of sense, actually, because you could supply evidence for 1 and 3, but maybe not 2, right?
Right.
And it becomes a lot less of a guessing game.
So it's from the production side though. It's whatever the producer, the producer determines what evidence they produce, and they're going to tag it appropriately for whatever domains they believe they're going to be audited for. It's meaningful too. In case of IBM, we will strictly tag things probably, not saying that we're doing this today, but this is what we do. We've done manually in the past is we review, software processes and procedures and release something like that. Use something called IBM IT security standard. So we'll tag it IBM ITSS. Then we have separate mappings from IBM's ITSS to various domains. So, it's a view. To me, this is a view. It's from production side. I can give a hint saying, I believe I'm producing, for the domains or frameworks or evaluation things or controls or requirements on hand. But so it's a hint. It's a hint saying if an auditor comes along from any given domain, here are the things you'll want to look at. We believe fulfill that requirement or sub requirement. Anyway, I don't know if that's helpful or not, but we're not going to be adding tons of tags. we're probably going to be only internally adding one tag. We'll probably obfuscate that or wipe it out on public SBOMs. And if an agent comes in and says internally, we need to see your stuff, we'll run it and we'll run a tool through it and say, well, we'll have a mapping between the IBM ITSS tags and some PCI tag or whatever. ISO, 2700 or whatever. So.
That's where we were supporting OpenCRE originally, I think, was to help with that kind of mapping. But I love the idea of, again, in metadata, just providing the ability to have metadata so that you could further break things out like that. I do think that would be really good. Because then if somebody took this, say that we codified this as just 1.1 TR, right, or 1.1a is what we were talking about, with all three of these things together, right, we could tag it with additional metadata, right, that somebody could then build on top of later if they wanted to. But again, this is where whenever these standards are released, when it comes to actually implementing them and auditing them, people will break them out their own ways, right? And for this one in particular, it is 3 requirements in 1 testing requirement.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the key takeaway I'm having now is that the existing model that we have works. How we would represent this is different than how PCI represents it, because we're going to represent it more granular, which I think is the right way to do it.
I think they'll be fine with that.
Yeah, we are missing properties, so we need to add properties to the requirements. So I will add that.
Thought it was right
And
there.
then no.
Got
We've
those
got
properties there?
No, this is the JSON properties. So we don't have an array of properties on this object.
Okay.
So
yeah.
that needs to be added. So I will add that. And then we need a supplemental field.
Yeah, and I
Now that
think
can
there's
be-
a question there if that should be a singular supplemental field, an array. I
Right.
would even maybe just for say like there should be a type on it also, but that might be too granular.
That's why I like the idea of having a metadata field where we could coordinate it but not restrict it. So we could say like these are the items of metadata that we support actively. We could add them over time if we see things being used frequently into that kind of coordinated namespace. But we say any extras that you have in here, that's fine. Like you can populate additional pieces of metadata in here. I think that would actually really enable a lot of downstream functionality, while allowing us to still retain some tight control over the things that we care about. So we could say a guidance field, right? That goes in here.
Yeah. Or in SSDF, what I have is examples.
Yeah,
Right.
so we could also say guidance examples, right? Zap has a couple of columns that have that type of a reference thing in there as well when it does the scans, which I found useful because I was just using them yesterday. So like that's kind of where this idea came from, is just having a couple of those extra bits that we can dump the information for things like this. It allows us to be flexible without having to be too restrictive.
Got it. I think that makes a lot of sense. But that goes back to the question of, do we want this to be a single text field or an array? We can have the metadata fields.
I was actually
That's
thinking of
fine.
it being an object.
An object?
Yeah, or maybe an array of objects. So I'm thinking of where you have the labels in containers was the main thing where this was kind of coming from, where you could arbitrarily namespace and say like, hey, these are the ones that we officially support. So that would be an array of key value pairs, where the key can be whatever you want. The value then would be, so in this case, it could be com.pci.guidance, right? Or if we wanted to say, hey, we're supporting our own namespacing here, we could have org.owasp.guidance, right? And then that maps to these other things. We could control that separately. We could say that this maps to those other areas, right? And say, hey, as an example, this is for PCI guidance, or for, so something like that, maybe where we just keep it as an array of key value pairs. Because then that's highly flexible and we can control our own namespace within there.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
But then you can arbitrarily add whatever you want. So the tagging thing that Matt was talking about, right? That could easily be supported in that metadata object.
Yeah, and
Right.
that's why we're pushing for the, that's why we push for the properties names to actually be URNs. So they could have you could tack onto the end of the URNs with whatever depth you want to go into any given top level domain or requirement or whatever. So even it's much like we do for build commits in GitHub. You have a semver that has major, minor, and whatever. You can actually add build. You add query parameters if you want specific to to your build or whatever, to your requirement. So it's the same concept.
Did Jeff, did you get a follow-up from Jake regarding like a spreadsheet from PCI?
I didn't. He was gonna send it out, but I didn't see anything.
Okay.
I can ping him in a day or two and see if he's forgot.
Okay. Yeah, no worries. Yeah, if we had a spreadsheet, we could obviously create a script to do a lot of this for us. So although if he does give us a spreadsheet, it's stuff like this that's probably going to be all in one big cell, I would imagine. So, I guess we'll have to see when we get it.
So
one
if
thing
I
is,
can, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So the specific context that I was thinking of, I just pinged out a link to OCI, Open Container Initiative, their image spec. They basically say, hey, we support annotations of any type, and these are the ones that we explicitly predefine. So what I'm suggesting is we predefine the annotations that we support, and we could start with the ones that we've seen in the standards that we've seen so far. So the two that I heard today, examples and guidance. Okay. We can namespace and set that up in the same way that this is done, but then people can add their own for their own company or anything else as they need to go. So I'm basically
yeah, that works for me. And this doesn't have to do anything with anything with PCI. So so guidance and examples are just, I think they're general purpose enough, and we can add on those without having to iterate on the spec, which is nice. Okay, you know what, I will by our next meeting, I'll have both of those things done. I'll have the properties done, and I'm gonna implement the supplemental stuff, and then we can talk about what I implemented to see if it's actually what we want, or if changes are needed. Or you know what, maybe I'll do a pull request. Maybe that's better. I'll do a PR. How about that? We still have to go through. So a couple other things. We in terms of the spec, we still have to go through a lot of these descriptions. Most of them are. I thought that most of them were empty.
A lot of them are down at the bottom. I took
all
the existing ones and then all the ones that are blank and I put them in that Google spreadsheet. So there's a link of that in the.
Oh, did you put the link out there?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's maybe just an ask that we spend some time offline between now and the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in the attestations work stream, linked out to that Google sheet.
Okay, so between now and the next meeting, let's all try to take a look at that. Where is that attestation channel?
I just threw the link in the chat here as well. It's also in the attestation channel.
Yeah.
And I apologize. I was planning on going through this, but we've had a very busy week, so I didn't have a chance to. But I will try to get on that sooner rather than later.
Same. Okay. No, this is well structured too. So thank you, Ian, for putting this together. I'm gonna try to take a stab at this too and look at it between now and next week.
I did put some down at the bottom in orange that looked like they were missing from the schema, but we had
Oh.
examples including them. So
Okay.
specifically on that signature, the signatories.
Right. Okay. All right. I'll take a look at that then. Thank you for calling that out.
And for the actual JSON spec there, that's in the 1.6-dev-attestations branch, or is that in just 1.6 now? Dev
No, it's in the
attestations. Okay, cool.
attestations. Yeah. And then if you ever want to, if you ever want to run the documentation on 1.6, you can do that as well. So like if you want to create the JSON, you know how like we have, if you go to CycloneDX.org and go to documentation, and you have this nice little thing of, you know, that you can navigate. If you ever want to do that on any of the Cyclone specs, you can go to, so within the attestation branch, for example, if you go to docgen JSON and then just run this, it'll actually generate it for you.
Cool.
Same thing with the XML
Awesome.
if you're interested in that. So
Need to throw a search engine on that.
right.
I was looking for Vex, trying to figure out where it was there, and I was having a devil of a time.
Yeah. That's search engine is actually a really good suggestion, actually. A search field. Okay. The other thing that we wanted to do was try to come up with some examples. And this is about using the spec, trying to make dummy attestations, because none of us, I don't think, are going to, you know, supply real attestations for our given employers, but you know, create dummy attestations that are representative of reality, typical organization. So we should probably start that next week as well. I do have one person on my team actually starting to do that in, he's going to start on it in about 2 or 3 weeks. So we're actually going to be using Cyclone, the spec. We're going to be mapping ourselves to SSDF, which also means that we're going to be mapping ourselves to BSIM using the spec, as well as ASVS and a few other ones, SCVS, for example. And we'll be creating the evidence and that sort of thing. And then the directive that I gave him was to also make a variant of that would be anonymized with then altered data. So we wouldn't be supplying the actual data from my employer. So we will be working on that and, you know, going down the SSDF route and BSIM and ASVS and SCVS. So that's work that we will be doing. Hopefully we can complete that by middle of August. Hopefully, we'll see. But simultaneously, we should probably try to come up with some examples. Maybe using SSDF, maybe using an OWASP standard or two, and see if what we designed actually works like we think it's going to work.
Well, we've got the standards now, so that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and with the addition of PCI, that's going to be huge. So that's really big news. So thanks, Jeff, for setting that up. That's awesome.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I think it's really cool. It'll get this a lot of attention.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of attention, I'm going to be probably forming a press release. It's going to include 2 things primarily. One is the cryptography bill of materials that we're going to be initiating here in the next week. So Matt, I'm going to be setting up those calls based on the schedule that you provided.
Yeah. You
So,
got my message in yesterday, right? So
yeah. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to. I've been buried.
cool.
But yeah, I'm going to be setting that up, and then
As long as you invite all the people that I was sent a list for. Or else
Yes.
I will get
Yes.
grief.
I don't think I have email addresses for these folks, but yes.
Okay.
Because I don't think you gave me email addresses, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I did in the.
Oh, did you? Okay.
On the
Perfect.
initial one thing, here's a potential list of collaborators as their name and their full email.
Okay. All right. Perfect. I'll look then. So the PR will press release will include the C-bomb stuff as well as the attestation work that we've been doing, because we want to get more people kind of looking at the work that we're doing. I think it's really important, especially if we want to have more and more standards actually support this, as well as more and more people actually start testing what we've built and providing us feedback. So with that, I don't know if we have to ask for permission to use PCI or not. I would imagine we do in a press release. I'm going to reach out to Synopsys to see if we can use them. OWASP, we're covered there.
How
Do we want to have?
do we have anybody from CSA, Cloud Security Alliance? That'd be awesome because they do like, anyways, they might be proactive in doing these things too. So I don't know. Anyways, and endorsing this and maybe. Anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Yeah, do you want to throw like Dr. Friedman in there too as a potential endorsement?
Who?
Dr. Friedman.
Oh, yeah, I can reach out to him and see. Sure.
Yeah, 'cause this seems like it's right up his alley.
Yeah, I mean, he's been briefed on it, and there was certainly some interest, and I think some appreciation on some of our design decisions, which I think is good. So, yeah, maybe I have to have a deeper dive call with him before he would endorse something like that, but I'm certainly willing to do that. So yeah, I'll reach out to him, or if
Yeah,
you
I
want
just
to,
think
that's
with-
fine too.
No, I mean, I'm happy to. I'll just CC you. I think, yeah, if we're throwing SSDF as like an early standard that we're really supporting and one of the early use cases, I think
Yeah.
he would be very supportive of it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because dealing with tens of thousands of PDFs is going to be challenging.
Well, that was the real original driver for this is those OMB attestations against SSTF. Those are going to be terrible.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's horrible. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
curious. So, did you say you were going to who are you going to reach out to?
Alan Friedman?
Alan Friedman.
Oh, yeah. That's a good idea. I wonder if we shouldn't reach out to NIST as well. I've got some really high level contacts over there.
Okay. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, reach out to them if you could, and maybe PCI as well, just to see if we can use their name in like a press release type of thing or not.
Oh, yeah. Let's, as we get closer with that, let's follow up with Jake and get
Yeah.
permission or a quote or something. He's
Right, exactly.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
they
I'll
seem
follow
really
up with Nick.
excited. So, okay, awesome. Well, we are almost at time. Does anybody have any last minute things they wanted to bring up? Nada. All right. Well, I'll give you 3 minutes back. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Steve.
Bye.